The digital clock on my desk bled red numbers into the darkness. 11:47 p.m. I was deep in a syntax error, the kind that makes you want to reach through the monitor and strangle the code. My wife Vicky was upstairs, likely asleep after another one of her boring, late-night calls about federal compliance. She'd been taking a lot of those lately, hushed tones, closed doors, and a strange, professional coldness that didn't quite match the woman I married. 3 sharp professional raps hit the door. I paused. In a neighborhood where the most exciting event is a stray cat on a porch, a knock at midnight is a gunshot. I waited. Silence. I went back to my algorithm. 5 minutes later, the world exploded. Bangs, 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 bang. The strikes were thunderous, heavy enough to rattle the framed photos on my desk and send my coffee mug sliding toward the edge. This wasn't a neighbor in trouble. This was an assault. I stood up, my heart hammering against my ribs, adrenaline slicking my palms. Through the peephole, the porch light revealed 2 figures. They weren't just men, they were symbols of absolute authority. Dark uniforms, tactical vests, and the unmistakable glint of silver badges. "Police, open up, we have a warrant." The voice was a jagged blade, cutting through the oak door with that rehearsed, commanding gravel that makes even an innocent man feel like a convict. Before I could even find my voice, the battering started again. Bang, 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 the door flexed on its hinges. Across the street, bedroom lights flickered on. The humiliation was instantaneous, a public execution of my reputation in high definition. "Last warning, open this door or we take it down." My hands shook as I fumbled with the deadbolt. I kept the security chain engaged, cracking the door just enough to see the nightmare Mark Peterson had finally unleashed. Standing there was a man whose name tag read Smith. He had the hollow, calculating eyes of a career predator and a posture that screamed military. His partner, Harris, was stockier, holding a stack of papers covered in blue ink stamps and official-looking seals. "Step back from the door, sir," Smith commanded. He didn't ask. He didn't suggest. He simply occupied the space where my autonomy used to be. "We are executing a compliance warrant for violations of community standards." Harris thrust the papers toward the gap in the door. I saw words like seizure, escalated enforcement, and judicial mandate. It looked terrifyingly real. "You've been notified, sir," Smith continued, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous silk. "You chose to ignore the association's final ultimatum. Now we are here to document the property and ensure immediate remediation, by force if necessary." I felt the air leave my lungs. A warrant for offense color. Since when do the police do HOA raids at midnight? "We aren't here to debate the law, we're here to enforce it," Harris snapped. "Now open the door, or the next sound you hear is the frame splintering." I looked at their belts, handcuffs, radios, heavy-duty flashlights. Their boots were polished to a mirror finish. Everything about them screamed official. But beneath the panic, a small, cynical voice in the back of my brain, the part of me that debugs broken logic for a living, tripped a flag. The font on the warrant was slightly off. The badges didn't have a precinct number, and Peterson, our HOA president, was a man who lived for theater. To understand how I ended up at the end of a metaphorical barrel, you have to understand Mark Peterson. 3 weeks ago, he was elected HOA president on a platform of restoring excellence. Within 48 hours, he had tripled the fines and invented violations that defied physics. I was his first target, a $750 fine because my fence was dusty pebble instead of desert sand. To the naked eye, they are identical. To Peterson, it was a declaration of war. He didn't just send letters, he sent directives. He talked about emergency protocols and oversight divisions. Then came Metro Security Solutions. Peterson had introduced them at a meeting like they were a private army. Their website was a shell stock photos of grim-faced men and vague testimonials about resolving resident friction. They weren't security guards. They were mercenaries for a suburban tyrant. For the last 3 days, a black sedan had been idling outside my house. They'd follow me to the grocery store. They'd stand on the sidewalk and take photos of my windows. When I called Peterson to demand he stop the stalking, he just laughed. "You chose to ignore the standards, David," he'd said, his voice dripping with a sickening, oily satisfaction. "Now the standards are coming to you." And here they were, at midnight. "I'm calling the real police," I said, my voice cracking slightly. Smith leaned in, his face inches from the crack in the door. "We are the authorized enforcement for this jurisdiction's civil mandates, sir. Call whoever you want. By the time they get here, we'll have this door off the hinges and your assets seized for non-compliance. Is that how you want your neighbors to see you? Dragged out in zip ties over a fence?" The psychological weight was crushing. I felt small. I felt like a bug under a boot. The intimidation was working exactly as Peterson had rehearsed it. I was seconds away from unlatching that chain and surrendering my home to these thugs. Then I heard the floorboards creak behind me. I didn't turn around, but I felt the atmosphere in the hallway shift. The air seemed to grow colder, heavier. "David." Vicky's voice was calm. It wasn't the voice of a sleepy wife startled by a noise. It was the voice of a person who had just walked into a room and identified a problem that needed to be deleted. I looked back. Vicky was standing on the bottom step. She wasn't in her bathrobe. She was wearing a crisp white button-down, and pinned to her belt was a heavy, gold, 5-point star encased in a circle. In her hand, she held a black leather wallet flipped open to an ID card that shimmered with holographic security threads. "Vicky, stay back," I whispered. "They have a warrant." She didn't stay back. She walked past me, her eyes locked on Smith. She didn't look at the uniforms. She looked at their souls, and she found them wanting. "Open the door, David," she said. It wasn't a request. "Vicky, they're going to." Opens the door. I unlatched the chain. My heart was in my throat. I expected them to tackle me, to swarm the house. Instead, as the door swung wide, the two officers went stone-cold silent. The aggressive, chest-puffing bravado of Smith and Harris evaporated like mist in a furnace. Vicky stepped onto the porch. She was half a head shorter than Smith, but in that moment she looked like a giant. She held her badge up, inches from Smith's nose. "I'm Special Agent Victoria Reid," she said, her voice a low, terrifyingly steady vibration. "Department of Justice. Office of the Inspector General, and you two are currently committing about 6 different federal felonies." The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the crickets. I could hear Harris's heavy, panicked breathing. We're with Metro Security," Harris stammered, his command presence crumbling into a pathetic whine. "We have a civil warrant signed by the HOA president." "There is no such thing as a civil arrest warrant for an HOA violation, you idiot," Vicky said, her sarcasm cutting like a scalpel. "And these uniforms, impersonating a peace officer is a felony. That warrant you're holding, forgery of a judicial seal, federal offense. The surveillance you've been conducting on this house for 72 hours, that's interstate stalking under the VAWA statutes, considering I work for the federal government." Smith tried to regain his footing. "You can't interfere with a private contract." "I'm not interfering," Vicky interrupted, a predatory smile touching her lips. "I'm investigating. See, I've been tracking Metro Security for 3 weeks, ever since you started harassing my neighbors. I was just waiting for you to be stupid enough to step onto my property." She pulled her phone from her pocket and tapped a single button. "Alpha Team, move in. Targets are contained on the porch. Secure the HOA president at his residence. He's the primary for the racketeering charge." Suddenly, the quiet street was flooded with blue and red strobe lights. 4 unmarked black SUVs roared around the corner, tires screeching. Real officers, men and women in tactical gear labeled Federal Agent, swarmed the lawn with a precision that made Smith and Harris look like kids playing dress-up. Smith dropped the warrant. It fluttered into the bushes like the trash it was. Harris actually began to cry. "Hands behind your heads, on your knees, now." The real shouts were louder, more terrifying, and backed by the weight of the United States government. I watched, stunned, as the 2 officers were shoved face down into the dirt. Smith, the man who had been threatening to break my door down 10 seconds ago, was now sobbing into the mulch as the steel cuffs ratcheted shut on his wrists. Vicky didn't move. She stood there, arms crossed, watching them with a calm, observant detachment. "Wait," I managed to say, my brain finally catching up. You're an inspector general. You told me you did corporate compliance." She glanced at me, a subtle, sarcastic glint in her eye. "It is compliance, David. I just ensure that people like Mark Peterson comply with the law, or they go to prison." A few houses down, I saw Mark Peterson being led out of his front door in his silk pajamas, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror as he realized his private army had just triggered a federal RICO investigation. He looked over at our house, caught Vicky's gaze, and instantly looked at the ground. He knew. He finally realized he hadn't just misjudged a neighbor. He had picked a fight with the one person who could dismantle his entire life with a phone call. Vicky turned back to me, the coldness vanishing, replaced by her usual warmth. "Sorry about the noise, honey. I wanted to catch them in the act of attempted entry to make the felony charges stick." I looked at the chaos on my lawn, the agents, the lights, the broken dreams of a suburban dictator. "You think you can finish that code now?" she asked, tilting her head. "Or do you want to stay out here and watch them process the evidence?" I looked at Smith, who who was currently being shoved into the back of a real police cruiser. I looked at the warrant in the bushes. "I think I've seen enough theatre for one night," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. The HOA wanted to enforce community standards. Well, Vicky just set a new one, and I don't think anyone going to complain about my fence color ever again.